Hi, and welcome to English 1302 on today, Monday, April 14th, which would mean that this is week 13 of the spring semester. Tonight we're going to talk about Emily Dickinson. I hope you've had a chance to kind of preview some of her poetry, because if you did, you probably found it pretty confusing. That's okay. For several reasons, but the main reason is because Emily Dickinson did not write her poetry for us. Every other poet that you've read wrote in an attempt to be understood. Robert Frost, William Wordsworth, John Donne, Sappho, all of these famous poets wrote and rewrote and revised their poems for clarity so that they could be understood by their readers. Emily Dickinson didn't do this. As you know from watching the video on her biography, her life, she wrote her poems on these large homemade books called fascicles, and she put them in her closet and under her bed and asked that they be burned upon her death. She did not want her poetry published. She didn't want people out there reading it. So she wrote it for herself, kind of like a diary in poetry form, which may be one reason why her use of capitalization is so confusing. And I only say it's confusing because it seems to lack consistency. In the English language, if you follow the rules, the conventions of standard written English, you know that we start each new sentence with a capital letter, and we also capitalize proper nouns like John and Sally and Mary. But she didn't. She seemed to capitalize words almost at random. And who knows, maybe she just wasn't a good speller, or maybe she's trying to accent or emphasize those words for a certain way. She also used a lot of hyphens, and she uses the long hyphen, the M dash, as opposed to an N dash, which indicates a long pause in the speaking breath. Now, did she do this in order to make it easier for us to understand? No, probably not. She may have had some secret code that we don't know about. She certainly lived an interesting life. All right. If you look at her life, then you know she spent the last, 20 years in her home and about the last 10 years just in her bedroom, which sounds like she may have been agoraphobic. I don't think she was. An agoraphobic is someone who has an irrational, crippling fear of open spaces. And while she didn't go out very much, she did go to the door and meet people. She went out back to garden and do other things outside. But it wasn't like she had this crippling fear of being outside. She just preferred to stay inside. She preferred to be alone. She had an interesting relationship with her parents. With her father, she was very close, and his death affected her profoundly. Her mother may have been a little cold, a little distant to her children, so she may have not gotten the same kind of nurturing that we think of as being healthy today. She was very close to her brother, Austin, and his wife, and later on his girlfriend. But and she came from a fairly affluent family. Her grandfather helped to found Amherst College. Her father was the now her father was this powerful man. He was a big fish in a small pond, coming from Amherst, Massachusetts. He was the treasurer of Amherst College. He was a local politician, twice elected to Congress. He was a lawyer, a speaker, as well as a farmer and a beekeeper. He was just an important, powerful man. Her brother Austin attempted to follow their father's footsteps, and she kind of like went the other direction. She did go to college. She went to a female seminary, which is a place where you go where people who want to become priests or nuns will go. But then she had a change of heart, apparently, because she came back home. Now, some sources will tell you that she was sent home for publicly refusing to acknowledge Jesus Christ as her Savior. Other sources say, no, she just really missed her dad. Other sources say, no, she simply wanted to go back home, but she moved back home to take care of her aging parents, which was not unusual for young unmarried women to do. It was pretty customary in their culture. But she did. She stayed home, took care of the house, took care of her parents until they died. She continued to write poetry up until her eyesight failed, and then passed away, I think, at a relatively young age, 56 or so, 62, something like that. But anyway, she left us a world of fascinating poetry. It just takes a little bit more thought to get into it, to really enjoy and appreciate it. She uses lots of personification. Be sure to keep your poetry vocabulary words out there in front of you. I also encourage you to keep a list of her themes from that PowerPoint in front of you as you read through these. She had some interesting themes in her poetry. Now, don't forget, like most poets, she also wrote about very familiar topics like love, life, death. She wrote a little bit about sex, although she never dated anyone that we know of, never slept with anyone that we know of. But one of her poems, called Wild Nights, was so powerful that people say, well, she must have had some experience in this area, or she couldn't have written such a powerful poem. I don't know. Anyway, be sure that you read her poems carefully, take good notes. Be sure to as you read the poems, kind of leave your mind open to not only what it says, but what else it says, what it means, and what else it might mean. Because we think about, I could not stop for death, and it says, you know, we're in the carriage there, and there's actually, be sure to look at details. There are actually 3 people in the carriage, and today we see death as this dark, sinister figure, you know, the Grim Reaper. She saw him differently. She saw him as being very civil, very polite, and they're traveling along the journey of her life. They pass the children at school. They pass the waves of grazing grain, and then they pass her grave, which is, you know, the house with the cornice in the ground. And it's just a fascinating way to look at things. So anyway, I hope you enjoy her poetry. I'll post another video on this, but you should probably go ahead and get started on your R4. Now, the R4, the 4th research project, is worth 150 points. So there's a couple of things to be aware of. First of all, you're going to want to follow the same ideas set forth in your R3 project. I tried to give you guys some good comments on those, so go back and look at my comments, and if you have any question about what those mean, please ask. Imagine if you had brought your paper to my office and you're sitting here across from me and I'm reading it and I say, wow, this needs more support. You might say, like what, for example? Or how can I support that? Or what would you suggest? But until you ask me, I don't know what it is you're confused about or that you're not clear on. So please be sure to ask me. And if you'll copy and paste, you know, like a paragraph and send that in your email, that'll help, so I won't have to go back and pull open the paper and stuff. And if I'm on my cell phone, that gets a little awkward. So ask your questions. Let me help you do good on paper. One very vital part of this last project is, of course, something we've been talking about for most of the semester: source evaluation. You want to choose and use only those sources that meet the 4 criteria. If your source doesn't have an author, don't use it. If your source is out of date, don't use it. If your source isn't long enough, if it has no depth, don't use it. And finally, if your source doesn't cite or is not cited by other sources, don't use it. There are simply too many good sources out there to use the bad ones. We're drowning in a sea of information, and if you use Google Scholar, it will help you discover a lot of those. But I saw on the R3, I saw a lot of people use websites or other sources with no authors. You really don't want to do that. Now the next thing, whoa, I just went blurry there for a second. The other thing to do is remember to use your own best judgment. The general topic was higher education in the U.S., higher education in America. And if you're looking at a source written by authors with Indian names, published in an Indian journal. It may not be as focused on American higher ed as some other sources might be. So be careful of foreign sources writing about America, even if they are writing about U.S. higher education, which lots of times they don't. They just write about their own system of higher education, which is vastly different than ours, by the way. Even countries like Great Britain that speak English and have very similar cultures to ours, their higher education is way different. Take a look at Cambridge, take a look at Oxford. It's just light years apart from ours. Better in some ways, not as good in other ways, but I do encourage you to find sources that you know are going to understand and focus on U.S. higher education. So find 3 good sources. Read the assignment sheet carefully because it's got a very specific word count range in there, but there's no range of sources. You can't turn in 1 or 2, you can't turn in 4 or 5. It's got to be 3 sources. So find your 3 best sources, alphabetize them according to the author's last name. Be sure that you follow MLA formatting guidelines on the works cited page, because sometimes I can't tell if your source meets the criteria or not because you haven't included enough information. Put quotation marks around the titles of chapters or the title of an article, italicize the name of a book or the title of a journal. Be sure you got the date in there, the page range for the journals. Give me all the information that MLA says that you should, and I'll be able to judge your source evaluations much more easily. Finally, don't forget that your paper has to make sense. And one way to do that is to follow that outline that you turned in, unless it's contraindicated. If I put a comment up there that, this thesis is not effective, then you don't want to use that thesis. But if you don't get a bad comment, then you probably do. On your first topic sentence, if it says this is not an effective topic sentence, then write another one. But if you don't get a negative comment, use that one. And really all you're doing is you're taking that thesis and writing just a few sentences on top of it to kind of generally introduce the topic to your reader. And then you're taking your topic sentences and you're supporting that idea expressed in the topic sentence with a quote from one of your sources. And then the next 4, 5, 6 sentences just explain what the quote means, what's its context, how it affects the point you're trying to make, or how it supports the point you're trying to make. And that's really about it. Tack on a conclusion that sums up, restates, renames, and you've got yourself a good paper. Don't forget to proofread carefully. Get rid of all those little grammar mistakes, misspelled words, comma splices, and sentence fragments. And I'm sure you'll do well.